The blood on Phillip Weston's pitchfork had dried to a rust-brown crust by the time he found her hiding in his barn, her green skin barely visible in the dimming light of evening, her breathing shallow and pained as she clutched a wound on her side that seeped dark crimson through her fingers. He should have killed her right then. That was what any sensible farmer would do upon finding an orc in their barn, wounded or not. The war between the human settlements and the orc clans in the borderlands had been burning for 3 generations, leaving scorched earth and bitter hatred in its wake. Phillip had lost his father to an orc raid when he was 12, watched his mother work herself into an early grave trying to keep the farm running without him. He had every reason to drive his pitchfork through her heart and drag her body to the village square for the bounty. Instead, he stood there in the doorway of his barn, the last rays of sunset painting the sky behind him in shades of amber and blood, and he looked at her face. Really looked at it. She could not have been more than 20 summers old, her features sharp and proud, even twisted in pain, her dark eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from knowing death was close. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her black hair hung in a thick braid over one broad shoulder. She wore leather armor that had been hacked apart in several places, revealing the muscled expanse of her arms and the curve of her collarbone above her chest. "Please," she said, and her voice was hoarse, cracked with thirst and desperation. "Please, just let me rest here one night. I will be gone before dawn. You will never see me again." Phillip tightened his grip on the pitchfork, his knuckles going white. Every instinct screamed at him to end this, to protect himself, to honor his father's memory by adding one more orc corpse to the count. But something in her eyes stopped him. It was not just fear he saw there. It was exhaustion, defeat. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from running too long with nowhere left to go. "You are bleeding all over my hay," he said finally, his voice flat. She glanced down at the spreading dark stain beneath her, then back up at him. "I am sorry. I did not mean to bring trouble to your door." Too late for that. He lowered the pitchfork slightly, though he kept it pointed in her general direction. "That wound is going to fester if you do not clean it. You will be dead in 3 days, maybe 4. Then I will die somewhere else." She tried to push herself up, her face going gray with pain, but her legs would not hold her, and she collapsed back against the hay bale with a grunt. Phillip watched her struggle, watched the stubborn set of her jaw as she tried again to rise and failed. He thought about his father, about the stories he had heard since childhood of orc savagery and bloodlust. He thought about what the villagers would say if they knew he had harbored one of the enemy under his roof. And then he thought about the look in her eyes, and he made a decision that would change everything. "Stay here," he said, turning on his heel and walking back toward the farmhouse. He returned 10 minutes later with a bowl of water, clean rags, and a bottle of strong spirits his mother had kept hidden in the cellar. The orc woman had not moved, though her eyes tracked him warily as he approached and knelt beside her in the hay. "I am going to clean that wound," he said. "It is going to hurt. Why are you helping me?" Her voice was full of suspicion, and he could not blame her for it. "I have not decided yet if I am." He set the bowl down and wrung out one of the rags. "Lift your arm." She hesitated, then slowly raised her left arm, revealing the gash along her ribs more clearly. It was deep, probably from a sword, and the edges were ragged. Phillip had seen enough injuries from farm accidents to know this would need stitching, but first he had to get it clean. He worked in silence, wiping away the dried blood and dirt as gently as he could. She made no sound, though he felt her muscles go rigid beneath his touch every time he pressed too close to the wound itself. When he uncorked the bottle of spirits and poured it directly into the gash, she finally made a noise, a strangled gasp that she bit off almost immediately, her hand shooting out to grip his forearm with bruising force. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe through it." Her grip slowly loosened, though she did not let go entirely. He could feel the calluses on her palm, the strength in her fingers even weakened as she was. When he glanced up at her face, he found her staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "What is your name?" she asked. Phillip Weston." He tore one of the clean rags into strips and began binding her ribs. "This is my farm. I work it alone." "Alone?" She winced as he pulled the binding tight. "No wife, no family?" "No." He did not elaborate, and she did not push. When he finished wrapping her wound, he sat back on his heels and studied her. "Your turn. What is your name?" She was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing whether to tell him the truth. "Grasha," she said finally. "Of the Iron Fang clan, or I was, until 3 days ago." "What happened 3 days ago?" Her jaw tightened. "I refused an order. My chieftain wanted me to burn a human village, kill everyone inside, including the children. I said no. So he cast me out and sent hunters after me to make sure I did not return to shame him with my disobedience." Philip absorbed this information slowly. An orc who had refused to kill humans. An orc who had been exiled for showing mercy. It went against everything he had been taught to believe about her kind, and yet here she was, bleeding in his barn because she had chosen compassion over duty. "The wound on your side," he said. "That was from your own people." "Yes." She closed her eyes, her head falling back against the hay. "They caught up with me yesterday morning. I killed 2 of them and ran. The 3rd got a blade between my ribs before I managed to lose him in the forest. There might be more coming. I know." She opened her eyes again, fixing him with a steady gaze. "That is why I will leave at first light. I have brought you enough trouble already, human." "Philip," he corrected. "If I am going to risk my neck sheltering you, the least you can do is use my name." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the ghost of a smile. "Philip," she repeated, testing the shape of it. "Thank you for the water and the bandages. You did not have to do that." "No," he agreed. "I did not." He stood, gathering up the bowl and the bloody rags. "But you are not leaving at first light. You can barely stand, and if those hunters are still out there, you would not make it half a mile before they ran you down. You will stay here until that wound starts to heal properly. A week, maybe 2. I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am telling you." He met her startled gaze evenly. "There is a loft above the barn. It is cleaner than down here and warmer at night. I will bring you food and water. In return, you stay out of sight and you do not make me regret this." "Why?" The question burst from her like she could not hold it back any longer. "Why are you doing this? You are human, I am orc. We are supposed to be enemies." Philip looked at her for a long time. This wounded woman who had sacrificed everything rather than harm the innocent. And he thought about all the hatred and violence that had defined his life and the lives of everyone he knew. He thought about his father and about the endless cycle of revenge that had taken him and so many others. And he thought about the choice in front of him now, to continue that cycle or to break it. "Because I am tired," he said quietly. "I am tired of death and killing and hate. And because you had the chance to murder children and you said no, even though it cost you everything. That takes a kind of courage I am not sure I have." He turned toward the barn door. "I will be back with food in an hour. Get some rest, Grasha of the Iron Fang clan." He left her there in the gathering darkness. And as he walked back to his farmhouse through the cool evening air, he wondered if he had just made the wisest decision of his life or the most foolish. The next morning, Philip woke before dawn as he always did and went through his usual routine of feeding the chickens, milking the cow, and checking the fence line along the southern pasture. He moved through his chores with mechanical efficiency, but his mind kept drifting back to the barn and the woman hiding inside it. He half expected to find her gone when he returned, despite her injuries. Orcs were tough. Maybe she had decided the risk of staying was greater than the risk of running. But when he climbed up into the loft with a plate of bread, cheese, and hard-boiled eggs, he found her exactly where he had left her, curled on her side atop a pile of old blankets he had brought out the night before. She was asleep, her face smoothed of the pain and weariness he had seen yesterday, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had any right to. Her hand rested near her bandaged ribs, and he could see the slow rise and fall of her breathing. He set the plate down quietly and turned to leave, but her eyes snapped open before he made it to the ladder. "Phillip." Her voice was rough with sleep. She pushed herself up slowly, favoring her injured side. "I did not hear you come up. I did not mean to wake you," he gestured to the plate. "I brought breakfast. Eat what you can. You need your strength." She looked at the food, then at him, then back at the food. "This is too much. You should save it for yourself. I have plenty." It was not entirely true. The farm had been struggling since the last raid had burned half his crops, and he had been rationing his stores carefully to make it through to the next harvest. But she did not need to know that. "Eat." Grasha reached for the bread slowly, as if expecting him to snatch it away. When he made no move to stop her, she tore off a piece and brought it to her mouth, chewing carefully. He watched her eat in silence, noting the way her shoulders gradually relaxed, the way some of the tension bled out of her posture. "How is the pain?" he asked. "Manageable." She swallowed and reached for another piece of bread. "Better than yesterday. You did good work with the bandaging. I have had practice. Farm life means plenty of injuries." He hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the loft, his legs dangling over the side. "I need to check the wound later, make sure there is no infection setting in." She nodded, her attention focused on the food. He let her eat undisturbed for a few minutes, listening to the morning sounds of the farm below, the chickens clucking in their coop, the cow lowing softly in her stall. It was peaceful, almost normal if he ignored the fact that he was harboring an enemy combatant in his barn. "Tell me about the village," Grasha said suddenly. "The one you refused to burn." She stopped eating, her hand frozen halfway to the plate. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I am trying to understand. I am trying to figure out who you are." She set the bread down and looked at him directly, her dark eyes searching his face. "It was a small place. Maybe 50 people, most of them farmers like you. The chieftain said they had been stealing water from the river that runs through our territory. He said they needed to be taught a lesson, made into an example." She paused, her jaw working. "When we arrived, the village headman came out to negotiate. He had his young daughter with him. She could not have been more than 6 summers old. She was holding his hand and crying because she was afraid of us, and the chieftain told me to kill her first, to make the father watch." Phillip felt something cold settle in his stomach. "And you refused." "I refused." She looked down at her hands. "I have killed before, in battle, in raids. I have done things I am not proud of because that is what my clan expected of me. But I could not kill that child. I could not do it, and I could not stand by while someone else did it either. So I told the chieftain no. I told him we were warriors, not butchers, and if he wanted that village burned, he would have to do it without me." "What did he do?" "He struck me across the face in front of the whole raiding party and declared me weak, unworthy of the Iron Fang name. He gave me 1 hour to leave clan territory before he sent the hunters after me." She touched her bandaged ribs gingerly. "I did not make it far enough." They sat in silence after that, the weight of her story hanging between them. Phillip thought about the orc raids he had heard about, the villages burned and people killed. He had always imagined the orcs as mindless savages who enjoyed the violence, who reveled in the destruction. But Grasha was proof that the reality was more complicated than that. She had a conscience. She had lines she would not cross, even at the cost of everything she knew. "The village," he said quietly. "Did the chieftain burn it after you left? I do not know." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. "I hope not. I hope my defiance made some of the others question the order. But I will probably never know for certain." Phillip stood and brushed the hay from his trousers. "I have work to do. I will be back this evening to check your wound and bring dinner. Stay in the loft and stay quiet. The village is 2 miles east, and sometimes people pass by on the road. If anyone sees you, we are both dead." "I understand." She picked up the plate again, but he could tell she was not really seeing the food. "Phillip, thank you. Again, you are taking a great risk for me. I know." He climbed down the ladder without looking back, because if he did, he might have second thoughts about the whole situation, and it was too late for that now. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Phillip worked the farm from dawn to dusk, tending his crops and animals, repairing the damage from the last raid, doing all the 100 small tasks that kept a farm running. And twice a day, morning and evening, he brought food and water to the loft and checked on Grasha's progress. She healed slowly but steadily. The wound began to close, the edges knitting together cleanly without the red streaks or foul smell that would have indicated infection. By the 4th day, she could sit up without wincing. By the 7th, she could stand and walk around the loft, though she still moved carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs. They talked during those visits, tentative conversations at first, filled with long silences and careful words. But gradually, as the days passed and trust began to build between them, the silences grew more comfortable, and the words came easier. Grasha told him about growing up in the Ironfang clan, about the harsh training that began in childhood and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of her place in the tribe. She told him about her mother, a fierce warrior who had died in battle when Grasha was 10, and her father, a weaponsmith who had taught her to see the beauty in well-crafted steel. She told him about the friends she had left behind, the warriors who had fought beside her, and who now would kill her on sight if they found her. Phillip told her about his own childhood, about working the farm with his father before the raid that took him, about his mother's quiet strength, and her slow decline after she was left alone. He told her about the loneliness of the past 5 years, running the farm by himself with no one to talk to except the animals and his own thoughts. He told her about the village, and the way people looked at him with pity now, the unmarried man approaching 30 with no prospects and a failing farm. "Why did you not marry?" Grasha asked one evening as he was changing her bandages. "Surely there were women in the village who would have had you." Phillip concentrated on his work, keeping his hands steady as he unwrapped the old cloth. "There were a few who showed interest. But after my mother died, I could not stomach the idea of bringing someone here just to watch them work themselves to death the way she did. This farm is dying, Grasha. The soil is exhausted, the buildings are falling apart, and I do not have the money or the manpower to fix it." "What kind of life would that be for a wife?" "A hard one," she admitted. "But not impossible. People have built lives on less." "Maybe." He examined the wound, pleased to see that it was healing well. The edges had sealed completely now, leaving an angry red scar that would fade with time. "You can probably take the bandages off in a few more days. The wound is closed." "Good." She flexed her arm experimentally, testing the range of motion. "I have been useless for too long. It feels wrong sitting up here while you do all the work. You are injured. You need to rest." "I am Orc." "We heal fast." She met his eyes. "Let me help you, Phillip, please. I am going mad with boredom, and I owe you for sheltering me. Put me to work." He wanted to say no. The smart thing would be to keep her hidden until she was fully healed and then send her on her way, minimizing the risk of discovery. But the truth was, he could use the help. The farm was too much for one person, and there were a dozen tasks he had been putting off because he simply did not have the time or energy to do them all. "Fine," he said. "But you work at night when no one can see you and you stay close to the barn. If you hear or see anyone coming, you hide." "Understood." Her face lit up with something that might have been gratitude or relief. "Understood." That night, after the sun had set and the world was dark, Grasha climbed down from the loft for the first time in over a week. Phillip showed her around the farm, pointing out the broken fence posts that needed replacing, the weeds choking the vegetable garden, the roof of the chicken coop that had a hole in it from the last storm. She set to work immediately, and Phillip quickly realized that he had underestimated her strength. Even injured, even moving carefully to protect her healing ribs, she could lift and carry things that would have taken him twice as long to manage. She pulled fence posts out of the ground with her bare hands, ripped weeds up by the roots in great clumps, and had the chicken coop roof patched before midnight. "Where did you learn carpentry?" he asked, watching her hammer the last nail into place with sure, efficient strokes. "My father. He taught me how to work with wood and metal both." She tested the patch with her hand, making sure it was secure. "He said a good warrior should know how to build as well as destroy. That way, we would always have value to the clan beyond our fighting skills." He sounds like a wise man. He was. She set the hammer down and turned to face him, wiping sweat from her brow. "What else needs doing?" They worked together through the night, side by side in the darkness, and Phillip found himself enjoying it more than he had enjoyed anything in a long time. There was something deeply satisfying about having someone to share the burden with, someone who did not complain or need constant direction. Grasha worked with quiet competence, asking questions when she needed clarification, but otherwise simply doing what needed to be done. By the time dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they had accomplished more than Phillip usually managed in 3 full days of work. The fence line was repaired, the garden was weeded, and they had even managed to clear out the old hay from the barn and lay down fresh bedding for the cow. "You should get back to the loft," Phillip said as the first birds began to sing. "It will be light soon." Grasha nodded, but she did not move right away. She stood there in the doorway of the barn, looking out at the farm with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you for letting me help," she said quietly. "I feel more like myself than I have in weeks. You did good work tonight, more than good." He hesitated, then added, "If you want, we can do this again tomorrow night. There is always more to do around here." She turned to look at him, and in the pale pre-dawn light he could see the gratitude in her eyes. "I would like that." The pattern continued for the next week. Phillip worked the farm during the day and Grasha rested in the loft, her body finishing the slow work of healing. At night, they worked together, 2 shadowy figures moving through the darkness, repairing and building and tending to all the things that had fallen into neglect over the years. Phillip found himself looking forward to those nights more than he wanted to admit. It was not just the help, though that was certainly welcome. It was the companionship, the easy rhythm they fell into, the way they could work in comfortable silence or talk about anything and everything as their hands stayed busy. Grasha told him about orc culture, about their complicated honor codes and clan hierarchies, about the songs they sang before battle, and the festivals they held to honor their ancestors. She told him about the beauty of the northern mountains where her clan made their home, the way the snow-capped peaks turned gold at sunset, the clear, cold streams that ran down through the valleys. Phillip told her about human customs that must have seemed strange to her, about harvest festivals and winter solstice celebrations, about the traveling bards who sometimes came through the village telling stories and singing songs. He told her about his dreams for the farm, the things he wanted to do if he ever had the resources, the crops he wanted to try growing, the improvements he wanted to make. And slowly, without either of them quite meaning for it to happen, something began to grow between them. It was there in the way their hands would brush when passing tools, in the way they had started to anticipate each other's needs without speaking, in the way Philip found himself watching her when she was not looking, admiring the strength in her arms and the determination in her face. He tried not to think about it too much. She was orc, he was human, and there was no future in whatever this was. When she was fully healed, she would leave and go north to try to find a new clan to take her in, and he would go back to working the farm alone. That was the way it had to be. Anything else was impossible. But on the 14th night after he had found her bleeding in his barn, something changed. They were working in the vegetable garden, pulling up the last of the weeds by lamplight, when Grasha suddenly froze. Her head snapped up, her whole body going tense in the way Philip had learned meant danger. "What is it?" he whispered. "Someone is coming, multiple someones, on horseback." Her nostrils flared. 5, maybe 6, still a ways off, but heading this direction. Philip's blood went cold. How far? 10 minutes, maybe less if they are moving fast. She was already backing toward the barn. "I need to hide." "No, wait." Philip grabbed the lamp and headed for the farmhouse at a run. "Follow me. If they are raiders, the barn is the first place they will look." He led her inside the house, through the small kitchen and into the bedroom he had once shared with his parents. There was a storage space beneath the floorboards where his mother had kept her valuables, just large enough for a person to squeeze into if they curled up tight. "Get in," he ordered, prying up the loose boards. "Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Understand?" Grasha looked like she wanted to argue, but the sound of hoofbeats in the distance was growing louder. She climbed into the space and pulled her knees to her chest, and Philip replaced the boards over her head, kicking a rug over them for good measure. He had just enough time to splash water on his face and light a few candles to make it look like he had been inside all evening before the riders arrived. They came thundering into his yard with no warning. 6 men on horseback carrying torches and weapons. Philip stepped out onto his porch, his heart hammering in his chest, and raised a hand in greeting. "Good evening, gentlemen. What brings you to my farm at this hour?" The leader of the group dismounted, and Philip recognized him with a sinking feeling. Thomas Vance, one of the wealthiest landowners in the region, a man known for his hatred of orcs and his ruthless business practices. "Weston." Vance strode forward, his hand resting on the sword at his hip. "We are hunting an orc fugitive, wounded female, armed and dangerous." "Have you seen any sign of her?" Philip kept his face carefully neutral. "An orc? No, sir, I have not seen anything. How long has she been in the area?" 2 weeks, maybe more. We tracked her this far south before losing the trail near the river." Vance's eyes narrowed. "You are certain you have seen nothing? No tracks, no signs of disturbance?" "Nothing. I keep to myself out here, do not get many visitors." Philip gestured to the farm around them. "As you can see, I have my hands full just keeping this place running." One of the other riders spoke up. "We should search the buildings. If she is here, she could be hiding." Philip's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to nod. "Of course, search whatever you like, but you will not find anything. I would not harbor an orc, sir. My father was killed in a raid. I have no love for their kind." Vance studied him for a long moment, then gestured to his men. "Check the barn and the outbuildings. Be thorough." Philip stood on the porch and watched as the riders dismounted and began searching his property, praying that Grasha would stay hidden and silent. He could hear them moving through the barn, their boots crunching on the hay, their voices echoing in the empty space. One of them climbed up to the loft, and Philip held his breath, but the man came down shaking his head. They searched for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. They checked the chicken coop, the root cellar, even the well. But they did not think to search inside the house, and they did not find any sign of Grasha. Finally, Vance called his men back. "She is not here. We are wasting time. Where will you search next?" Philip asked, trying to sound casually curious. "North. If she is still alive, she will be trying to make it back to clan territory." Vance swung back into his saddle. "If you do see anything, Weston, you report it immediately. There is 100 gold piece bounty on her head, dead or alive." "I will keep my eyes open," Philip lied. He watched them ride away, waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely into the night, and then he went back inside and pried up the floorboards. Grasha emerged from the hiding space, her eyes wild and her breathing harsh. "They are hunting me specifically. They know I am here. They know you are in the region. They do not know you are on my farm." Philip helped her out and replaced the boards. But Vance was right about one thing. If you are going to survive, you need to get north, back to clan territory. "You cannot stay here forever." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely afraid. "But if I go back, the Iron Fang clan will kill me, and I do not know if any of the other clans will take me in. I am an exile, marked as weak and disobedient. I might die in the mountains before I find anyone willing to give me shelter." Philip wanted to tell her it would be fine, that she would find a new home and a new life. But he could not lie to her, not about something this important. "What will you do?" "I do not know." She looked at him, and there was such vulnerability in her expression that it made his chest ache. "What would you do if you were me?" He thought about it, really thought about it. "I would find somewhere remote. Somewhere I could build a life away from both humans and orcs. It would be hard, but it would be yours. Alone." The word came out small and broken. "I would live alone for the rest of my life." Before he could think better of it, before he could talk himself out of it, Philip said, "It does not have to be alone." Grasha went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that this farm is remote. I am saying that you have been here for 2 weeks and no one knew. I am saying that I could use a partner, someone strong and capable who knows how to work hard." He took a breath. "I am saying stay." "Philip," she shook her head. "That is impossible. You know it is. If anyone found out you were harboring me, they would kill you. They would burn this farm to the ground. Then we make sure no one finds out." He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "You work at night. You stay out of sight during the day. We are careful. It could work, Grasha. If we are smart about it, it could work." "Why?" The question was almost a whisper. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because I am falling in love with you," he thought but did not say. "Because the thought of you leaving feels like losing something precious I did not know I had. Because for the first time in 5 years, I do not feel alone. Because you deserve a chance at a life," he said instead. "Because you were brave enough to refuse an evil order even though it cost you everything. Because I think you could be happy here, and I know I would be happy to have you stay." Grasha looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm and rough with calluses, and her fingers wrapped around his with surprising gentleness. "I will stay," she said. "For as long as you will have me, I will stay." The relief that flooded through Philip was so intense it made him dizzy. He squeezed her hand, unable to find words, and she squeezed back, and in that moment, everything changed between them. The seasons turned, summer fading into autumn and then into the first cold breath of winter. Grasha settled into life on the farm with surprising ease, and true to his word, Philip taught her everything she needed to know about the rhythms of the land and the care of the animals. She learned to milk the cow and gather eggs from the chickens without startling them. She learned which plants were weeds and which were crops, how to tell when the vegetables were ripe for harvest, how to preserve food for the winter months. She learned to read the weather in the clouds and the wind, to know when rain was coming and when frost would threaten the last of the growing things, and Philip learned from her in turn. She taught him fighting techniques her father had shown her, ways to defend himself if raiders came again. She taught him about tracking and hunting, skills that had been part of her training as a warrior. She taught him orc songs in her native language, the words strange and beautiful in his ears. They fell into a comfortable partnership, dividing the work between them, each playing to their strengths. Philip handled anything that required going into the village or interacting with neighbors. Grasha took on the heavy labor, the tasks that required strength and endurance. Together, they slowly brought the farm back from the edge of ruin. The repairs they had started in those first weeks continued and expanded. They fixed the sagging roof of the barn, replaced rotted fence posts, cleared new land for planting come spring. Grasha built a smokehouse for preserving meat and a better system for collecting rainwater. Philip planted winter wheat and hardy vegetables that would survive the frost. By the time the first snow fell, the farm looked better than it had in years. The buildings were sound, the animals were healthy and well-fed, and the stores in the root cellar were full enough to see them through even a harsh winter. But more than the physical improvements, something else had changed. The farmhouse no longer felt empty and cold. There was laughter in the evenings when they sat by the fire and talked. There was warmth in the knowledge that he would wake up and she would be there, that he was no longer facing the world alone. Philip tried not to think too hard about what it meant, about the way his heart lifted every time he saw her, about the way he had started looking for excuses to touch her hand or stand close to her. She was his partner, his friend, the person who had brought life back to his dying farm. That should have been enough. But it was not enough, and as the days grew shorter and the nights grew longer, he found it harder and harder to deny the truth. He was in love with Grasha, completely, utterly, irrevocably in love with her. He did not know when it had happened exactly. Maybe it had been that first night when he found her in the barn and chose mercy over revenge. Maybe it had been during those long nights working side by side in the darkness. Maybe it had been the day she had laughed at one of his jokes, and he had realized he would do anything to hear that sound again. Whenever it had started, it was too late to stop it now. She had become the center of his world, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. The problem was, he had no idea how she felt about him. She was affectionate in her way, quick with a smile or a gentle touch, but he could not tell if it was genuine feeling or simply gratitude for the shelter he had provided. And he was terrified of saying something, of ruining the delicate balance they had achieved. So he kept his feelings to himself, and tried to be content with what they had. Winter deepened, and the farm became a small island of warmth and light in a cold white world. Snow piled high against the buildings, and ice formed thick on the water trough. Philip and Grasha spent more time indoors, working on projects by the fire, mending tools and clothes, planning for spring planting. It was during one of those quiet evenings, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, that Grasha finally asked the question he had been dreading. "You ever regret it?" She was sitting on the floor near the fire, oiling the blade of an axe that had grown dull from use. "Letting me stay, I mean. Do you ever wish you had turned me away that first night?" Philip looked up from the harness he was repairing. "No, never. Why do you ask?" "Because you have given up so much for me. Your safety, your peace of mind, your chance at a normal life." She set the axe aside and looked at him directly. "If anyone ever found out about me, you would lose everything. And I wonder sometimes if I am being selfish, staying here, putting you at risk." "You are not being selfish. I asked you to stay, remember?" He set the harness down and moved to sit beside her on the floor. "Grasha, having you here has been the best thing that has happened to me in years, maybe ever. This farm was dying before you came." "I was dying, in a way, just going through the motions. You brought it all back to life." "I just pulled some weeds and fixed some fences," she said, but there was color in her cheeks. "You did more than that, and you know it." He hesitated, then decided to risk it. "You gave me something to care about again, someone to care about. That is worth any risk." She went very still, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "Phillip, what are you saying?" This was it. The moment where he either laid his heart bare or backed away and kept pretending. He thought about his father, about the way his father had courted his mother with shy smiles and small gifts, until she had finally agreed to marry him. He thought about all the time he had wasted being afraid, and he decided he was done being afraid. "I am saying that I care about you, Grasha. More than I probably should. I am saying that when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, and if that is too much or too soon or too complicated, I understand. But I needed you to know." For a long moment, she did not say anything. She just stared at him with wide eyes, her hand trembling slightly in his. Then, to his complete surprise, she started to cry. "Grasha," he shifted closer, alarmed. "I am sorry, I should not have said anything. Please do not cry. I am not sad." She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, leaving wet streaks across her green skin. "I am crying because I thought I was alone in this. I thought I was the only one feeling things I should not feel." Hope flared bright in his chest. "You feel it too." "Of course I feel it too," she laughed, a wet, broken sound. "I have been in love with you since the night you let me help with the farm, since you trusted me enough to work beside you. I just thought it was impossible. I thought you could never see me as anything but the enemy you were kind enough to shelter." "You are not the enemy," Phillip said fiercely. "You have never been the enemy. You are the woman who chose mercy over cruelty, the woman who works harder than anyone I have ever met, the woman who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me want to be better than I am. You are the woman I love, Grasha. All of you, exactly as you are." She made a sound that was half laugh and half sob and threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him over. He caught her, held her tight, and felt the last pieces of the wall around his heart crumble to dust. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms by the fire, and when they finally pulled apart, Grasha cupped his face in her hands and kissed him. It was tentative at first, careful, as if she was afraid of hurting him with her tusks or her strength. But Phillip kissed her back with everything he had, and the carefulness melted away into something deep and fierce and real. When they broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Grasha rested her forehead against his and smiled. "I never thought I could have this. Happiness. A home. Someone who sees me for who I am and loves me anyway." "You can have it," Phillip promised. "You can have all of it for as long as you want. I am yours, Grasha, completely. And I am yours." She kissed him again, softer this time, full of promise. "I will stay with you, Phillip Weston. I will help you build a life here, and I will protect what we have with everything I am." They spent the rest of the winter in a haze of happiness, settling into their new reality as partners not just in work but in love. They were careful, still mindful of the need for secrecy. But within the bounds of the farm they allowed themselves to be free. Grasha moved from the barn loft into the farmhouse, into Philip's bed and his life without reservation. They fell asleep tangled together each night and woke the same way each morning. They shared meals and chores and quiet moments by the fire. They made plans for the spring, for all the years beyond that, building a future together one day at a time. It was not always easy. There were moments of fear when riders passed on the road, or when neighbors stopped by unexpectedly and Grasha had to hide. There were moments of frustration with the limitations their situation imposed, with the knowledge that they could never be truly open about what they were to each other. But those moments were small compared to the joy of being together, and they weathered each challenge as they came, united in their determination to protect what they had built. Spring came eventually, as it always did, the snow melting away to reveal rich, dark earth ready for planting. Phillip and Grasha worked side by side to prepare the fields, turning the soil and sowing seeds, their hands moving in practiced unison. The farm flourished under their combined care. The crops grew thick and healthy, the animals multiplied, and for the first time in years, Phillip actually had surplus to sell at market. The villagers commented on his improved fortunes, and he deflected their questions with vague mentions of hard work and good weather, never hinting at the real reason for his success. Summer brought long warm days and longer warm nights, and Phillip found himself happier than he had ever imagined possible. He had the farm, he had Grasha, and he had hope for the future. What more could any man want? But happiness, he learned, could be fragile. And in a world torn by war and prejudice, peace was never guaranteed. It was a late summer evening when the raiders came. Phillip had gone into the village to sell vegetables and buy supplies, leaving Grasha alone on the farm. He had been uneasy about it, had almost canceled the trip, but they needed the money and the goods, and Grasha had assured him she would be fine. She was fully healed now, strong and capable, more than able to defend herself if necessary. He should have listened to his instincts. He was halfway home when he saw the smoke rising in the distance, black and thick against the evening sky. His heart stopped because he knew that smoke, knew what it meant. The farm was burning. He kicked his horse into a gallop, the cart bouncing wildly behind him as he raced down the road. Please, he prayed to any god that might be listening. Please let her be safe. Please let her be alive. He crested the rise that overlooked his farm, and his worst fears were confirmed. There were riders in his yard, at least a dozen of them, and the barn was engulfed in flames. The farmhouse was still standing, but the door had been kicked in, and he could hear shouting from inside. Phillip abandoned the cart and ran, his hand going to the knife at his belt. It was a poor weapon against armed riders, but it was all he had, and he would die before he let them hurt her. He made it to the yard before he saw her. Grasha stood in front of the farmhouse, his wood-cutting axe in her hands, surrounded by bodies. 3 men lay dead at her feet, their blood soaking into the dirt, and more were circling her warily. She was wounded, a gash across her shoulder and another along her thigh, but she was standing tall and defiant, the axe held ready. "Come on," she snarled at the raiders, her tusks bared in a fierce grin. "Who wants to die next?" Phillip recognized the lead raider immediately. Thomas Vance, the same man who had come looking for Grasha months ago, and suddenly he understood. This was not a random raid, this was targeted. They had found out about Grasha somehow, and they had come to take her. "Weston," Vance spotted him and gestured with his sword. "Get back." "That creature is dangerous." "She is not a creature," Phillip shouted, running forward. "She is under my protection. Leave her alone." "Your protection?" Vance laughed, a cruel sound. "You have been harboring an orc fugitive, Weston. That is treason. You will hang for this." "I do not care." "Just leave her alone." 2 of the raiders moved to intercept him, grabbing his arms and forcing him to his knees. He fought them, but they were stronger, and within moments he was restrained, forced to watch helplessly as the rest of the raiders closed in on Grasha. She fought like a demon. The axe flashed in the firelight, deadly and precise, and 2 more raiders fell before the rest managed to overwhelm her through sheer numbers. They tackled her to the ground, wrenched the axe from her hands, and pinned her there with swords at her throat and back. No. Phillip struggled against his captors, but they held him fast. "Do not hurt her, please." Vance dismounted and walked over to where Grasha lay pinned in the dirt. He looked down at her with disgust. "I knew you were here." One of Weston's neighbors saw smoke from the chimney at odd hours, heard voices when he should have been alone. "I have been watching this farm for weeks, waiting for proof." He turned to Phillip. "You are a fool, Weston, and a traitor. You will both die for this." "She saved a village," Phillip said desperately. "She refused to kill children. That is why her clan exiled her. She is not your enemy. She is an orc. That makes her my enemy." Vance raised his sword. "Any last words, creature?" Grasha looked past him, looked directly at Phillip, and smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was full of love. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You gave me more happiness than I ever deserved." "No," Phillip whispered. "No, please." Vance brought his sword down, but the blade never landed. There was a sound like thunder, and suddenly the raiders holding Grasha were thrown backwards, their bodies crumpling like dolls. Vance stumbled, staring in shock at something behind Phillip, and then he turned and ran for his horse. Phillip twisted to look behind him and felt his jaw drop. Orcs. At least 20 of them, emerging from the tree line with weapons drawn. But these were not Iron Fang clan warriors. Their armor bore different markings, their war paint was in different patterns, and at their head was an orc woman even larger than Grasha, with gray streaks in her black hair and a scar across one eye. The raiders who were still alive scattered, fleeing on horseback in all directions. The orcs let them go, their attention focused on Grasha, who had pushed herself to her feet and was staring at the newcomers with wide eyes. The scarred orc woman approached her slowly, her expression unreadable. "Grasha of the Iron Fang clan. I am Ragtha of the Stoneheart clan. We have been searching for you." Grasha's hand went to the wound on her shoulder, her whole body tense. "Why, to kill me for my exile?" "No," Ragtha shook her head. "To offer you a place. Word of your defiance reached us through traders and travelers. They say you refused to murder children. They say you stood against your chieftain and accepted exile rather than compromise your honor. That kind of courage is rare and we value it." She gestured to the orcs behind her. "The Stoneheart clan does not make war on the innocent. We fight only when we must to protect our own. You would fit well among us." Grasha swayed on her feet, clearly struggling to process this. "You want me to join your clan?" "Yes, if you wish it." Ragtha glanced at Phillip, still held by the 2 raiders who had not fled. "But I see you may have other considerations." "Release him," Grasha said immediately. "Now." Ragtha made a gesture and the orcs moved forward, forcing the raiders to let Phillip go. He scrambled to his feet and ran to Grasha, catching her as her legs gave out. She was shaking, her wounds bleeding freely, but she was alive. "I cannot leave him," Grasha said, looking up at Ragtha. "He saved me. He gave me a home when I had nothing. I love him and I will not abandon him." Ragtha studied them both for a long moment, her scarred face thoughtful. "This human has shown you great kindness." "He has shown me more than kindness. He has shown me what it means to choose love over hate, to build instead of destroy. He is a good man, Ragtha, the best I have ever known." "I see." Ragtha turned her attention to Phillip. "And you, human, you risked everything to shelter an orc. You were willing to die to protect her. Why?" "Because I love her," Phillip said simply. Because she is worth 1,000 of those men who wanted her dead, because the world is full of enough hate already and I am tired of it. Ragtha smiled, a fierce expression that softened her scarred features. You are brave for a human, foolish perhaps, but brave. She looked back at Grasha. The offer stands, but I will not ask you to leave your mate behind. If you wish, he may come with you to Stoneheart territory. We can offer you both sanctuary, a place where you do not need to hide what you are to each other. Grasha looked at Phillip, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What do you think? Phillip looked around at the farm, at the burning barn and the trampled garden and the bodies in the yard. Everything he had worked for, everything his parents had built, destroyed in one evening. There was nothing left for him here now. Vance would spread word of what he had done, and even if the man never returned, the villagers would drive Phillip out or worse. But when he looked at Grasha, bruised and bleeding but alive, he knew the choice was easy. Where you go, I go, he said. This farm was just land and buildings. You are my home now. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and he tasted blood and tears and love all mixed together. Ragtha cleared her throat. We should move. Those raiders may return with reinforcements. Can you both travel? Yes, Grasha said, pulling back from Phillip reluctantly. But I need to tend to our wounds first, and we should gather what supplies we can from the farmhouse. The Stoneheart orcs helped them salvage what they could from the house, which fortunately the raiders had not torched. They packed food, clothes, tools, and a few precious items that had belonged to Phillip's parents. Grasha wrapped their wounds quickly, and then they set off into the forest, leaving the burning barn and the ruined farm behind. They traveled through the night, moving north toward the mountains. Phillip rode double with Grasha on one of the horses the Stoneheart orcs had brought, her arms wrapped around him, her warmth solid and real against his back. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ragtha called a halt in a small clearing beside a stream. We will rest here for the day and continue at dusk. Grasha, have your mate help you bathe your wounds in the stream. We cannot risk infection. Phillip helped Grasha down from the horse, and they made their way to the water's edge. He carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandages and cleaned the gash on her shoulder and the one on her thigh, relieved to see that neither was as deep as he had feared. That was incredibly stupid, you know, he said as he worked. Fighting a dozen armed raiders alone, you could have hidden. You could have run. They were destroying our home, Grasha said. I could not just let them do it. Besides, I knew you would come back, and I wanted to make sure there was something left for you to come back to. You are what I came back for. The farm does not matter. It mattered to you. It was your family's legacy. No, he looked up at her, meeting her eyes. You are my legacy now, you and whatever life we build together, wherever that happens to be. She cupped his face in her hands, heedless of her wounds. I do not deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve everything good in the world. He kissed her palm. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. They stayed by the stream until the sun was high, then rejoined the rest of the group. Ragtha had set sentries and the other orcs were resting, but she was sitting by a small fire, sharpening her blade. Come, she said when she saw them approach. Sit. We should talk about what happens next. They settled by the fire, and Ragtha set her blade aside. The Stoneheart clan is different from other orc clans. We trade with some human settlements that are willing, and we focus more on craftsmanship than raiding. It is not an easy life, but it is honest. You will both be welcome there, though I will not lie to you. There will be those who question a human living among us. You will have to prove yourself, Phillip. I can work, Phillip said. I can farm, build, whatever is needed. I am a fast learner. Good. You will need to be. Ragtha's scarred face softened slightly. But you should know, the The Stoneheart clan honors love matches. If you and Grasha wish to formalize your bond in our tradition, you would be recognized as mates. It would give Philip certain protections and rights within the clan. Grasha's hand found Philip's. What does that involve? A ceremony, an exchange of vows before the clan, a marking to show that you belong to each other. Ragtha gestured to a scar on her own wrist, a deliberate pattern of lines. It is permanent and binding, not something to enter into lightly. Philip looked at Grasha, saw the question in her eyes, and smiled. There is nothing light about what we feel for each other. I would be honored to be bound to you in any tradition, any way you wish. Then we will have the ceremony when we reach Stoneheart territory, Grasha said, her voice thick with emotion. I want the whole clan to know that this human is mine and I am his. Ragtha nodded approvingly. So be it. They reached Stoneheart territory 3 days later, after traveling through dense forests and up winding mountain paths that left Philip's legs aching and his lungs burning. The clan's settlement was nestled in a valley between two peaks, a collection of sturdy stone and timber buildings that blended into the landscape. The Stoneheart orcs, who had not been part of the rescue party, came out to greet them, curious and wary. Philip felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers and mutters, but Ragtha raised her hand for silence and addressed the crowd. This is Grasha, who refused to murder innocents and was exiled for her honor. And this is Philip, the human who sheltered her at great cost to himself. They have proven their courage and their loyalty, and I have offered them sanctuary. Does anyone challenge my decision? There was a long, tense silence. Then an older orc male stepped forward. I do not challenge it. Any orc willing to sacrifice for honor deserves a place among us. And any human brave enough to love an orc and face down raiders to protect her has earned my respect. He looked at Philip and inclined his head. Welcome, human. Others echoed the sentiment, and slowly the tension eased. Not everyone was happy about it, Philip could tell, but Ragtha's authority carried weight, and no one was willing to openly defy her. They were given a small house on the edge of the settlement, 2 rooms with a hearth and a sleeping platform. It was simple and sparse, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. Over the following weeks, Philip threw himself into learning the ways of the Stoneheart clan. He worked alongside the orc farmers, learning their techniques for growing crops in the Rocky Mountain soil. He helped with building projects, carrying stones and timber, his hands blistering and then callousing over. He learned basic phrases in the orc language, stumbling over the guttural sounds but gradually improving. It was hard work, harder than anything he had done on his farm, and there were days when he collapsed into bed so exhausted he could barely move. But Grasha was always there, working beside him during the day and holding him at night, and her presence made everything bearable. The ceremony to formalize their bond was held on the night of the autumn equinox, a sacred time for the Stoneheart clan. The whole clan gathered in the central clearing, a great bonfire roaring in the center. Ragtha officiated, her voice carrying over the crackle of flames. We gather to witness the binding of Grasha and Philip, to recognize their choice to walk through life as one. This is a sacred bond, not to be broken save by death itself. Grasha and Philip stood before the fire, hands clasped. Ragtha gave them each a knife, and following her instruction, they each made a small cut on their palms and pressed them together, letting their blood mingle. Speak your vows, Ragtha commanded. Grasha went first, her voice steady and strong. I vow to stand beside you in all things, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want. I vow to protect you with my strength, to cherish you with my heart, to build a life with you that honors us both. You are my mate, Phillip Weston, from this day until my last breath. Philip swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I vow to love you without reservation, to trust you without doubt, to support you in all your endeavors. I vow to see you always as you truly are, fierce and kind and beautiful. I vow to make you happy, Grasha, every day I have with you. You are my mate, my love, my home, now and forever." Ragtha took a burning brand from the fire and used it to heat a metal tool. Then, with quick, efficient movements, she pressed the tool to their wrists, one after another. The pain was sharp and intense, but brief, and when it was done, they each bore the same mark, a pattern of interlocking lines that symbolized unity. "It is done," Ragtha declared. "They are bound. Let the clan witness and honor this union." The orcs erupted in cheers, and someone started beating drums. Food and drink appeared, and the celebration went long into the night. Phillip danced with Grasha under the stars, her laughter ringing in his ears, and he thought about how far they had both come. From that first night in the barn, bleeding and afraid, to this moment, surrounded by friends and family, bound together in love and commitment, it had not been an easy path. They had both lost so much, but what they had found in each other was worth every sacrifice. As the months turned into years, Phillip and Grasha built a life together in Stoneheart territory that neither could have imagined in those early desperate days. Phillip became a respected member of the clan, his farming expertise helping to improve crop yields and his willingness to work hard earning him acceptance even among the most skeptical orcs. Grasha thrived in the environment of the Stoneheart clan, finally finding a place where her values aligned with those around her. She became one of Ragtha's most trusted warriors, helping to defend the territory and mediate disputes. But she also never lost her skill with building and crafting, and she and Phillip expanded their small house over the years, adding rooms and improvements. They faced challenges, of course. There were orcs who never fully accepted Phillip, who saw him as weak or unworthy. There were humans from nearby settlements who viewed the Stoneheart clan with suspicion and fear, despite Ragtha's efforts at peaceful trade. There were hard winters when food was scarce, and there was sickness that took some of the elderly and very young. But through it all, they had each other. They worked side by side, faced each challenge as partners, and built something strong and lasting. 5 years after the night the raiders came to the farm, Grasha gave birth to their first child, a daughter with Phillip's brown eyes and Grasha's green skin. They named her Mara, and she became the light of their lives. 2 years later, a son followed, with Grasha's tusks and Phillip's sandy hair. They named him Eric, and he was as stubborn and determined as both his parents combined. The children grew up surrounded by love, accepted by the Stoneheart clan as proof that orcs and humans could not only coexist, but create something beautiful together. They learned both human and orc customs, spoke both languages fluently, and moved between both worlds with an ease their parents could only envy. Phillip taught them to farm and to appreciate the cycles of growing things. Grasha taught them to fight and to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Together, they taught their children that love was stronger than hate, that courage meant choosing mercy, and that family was not about blood but about the bonds you forged through choice and commitment. On their 10th anniversary, Phillip and Grasha stood together on the ridge overlooking the Stoneheart settlement, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were down below, playing with other younglings, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Grasha asked, echoing the question she had asked him years ago by the fire in the farmhouse. "Leaving your old life behind, giving up everything to be with me." Phillip wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "I did not give up anything that mattered. I gained everything that does." He kissed her temple. I have you, I have our children, I have a home and a purpose and a clan that has accepted me. What more could I possibly want? Nothing, Grasha said softly. There is nothing more, this is everything. They stood there together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Below them, the settlement glowed with warm firelight, smoke rising from chimneys, the sounds of life and laughter drifting up. Philip thought about the young man he had been, alone and bitter on a failing farm, trapped by grief and duty. He thought about the terrified woman he had found bleeding in his barn, cast out and hunted with nowhere left to go. And he thought about the journey they had taken together, the choices they had made, the love they had found against all odds. It had started with a simple decision, a moment of mercy when revenge would have been easier. It had grown through shared work and quiet conversations, through trust built slowly over time. It had been tested by raiders and exile, by prejudice and fear and loss, but it had endured. It had grown stronger, and it had become the foundation for something neither of them could have built alone. Come on, Grasha said, tugging his hand. Let us go home. The children will be hungry, and I want to make sure Eric has not challenged anyone to a fight again. Philip laughed and let her lead him down the path toward the settlement, toward their home and their family and their future. The night was cool and clear, full of promise, and he knew with absolute certainty that there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the challenges they had faced, but because of them. Every obstacle had made them stronger. Every loss had taught them to cherish what remained. Every moment of fear had made the peace they had found that much sweeter. Grasha had picked up an axe that terrible evening when the raiders came, and she had fought to protect what they had built together. But the real victory had not been in the fighting. It had been in the choice they had made, years earlier, to shelter and be sheltered, to love and be loved, to build a life together despite a world that said it was impossible. And now, surrounded by the clan that had embraced them, raising children who represented hope for a better future, they could look back on that choice and know it had been the right one. As they reached their home and opened the door to the warm glow of their hearth, as their children came running to greet them with hugs and excited chatter about their day, Philip caught Grasha's eye and smiled. She smiled back, and in that smile was everything they had been through and everything they had yet to face. It was a promise and a memory, a beginning and a continuation, 1,000 small moments of love and trust and commitment woven together into something unbreakable. This was their story. A human and an orc who had found each other in the darkness and built a light that would endure for generations. A love that had started with mercy and grown into something that changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. And it was a story that would continue, passed down through their children and their children's children, a reminder that even in a world torn by war and hatred, love could find a way. That courage was not about being unafraid, but about choosing what was right despite the fear. That home was not a place, but the people you chose to stand beside through whatever came. The raiders had come at dusk and tried to destroy everything. But Grasha had picked up an axe and ended their threat. And in the years since, she and Philip had built something far stronger than what had been lost. They had built a family, a life, a future worth fighting for. And as they sat down to dinner that night, their children chattering around them, the fire warm and bright in the hearth, they knew that this was their happily ever after. Not perfect, perhaps, but real and hard-won and theirs, and that was more than enough.